Now we will discuss gesture and speech as possible evolutionary sequences. Natural language, as Pinker and Bloom have argued, is compatible with the Darwinian theory of natural selection. So, what is the theory of Darwin, which is natural selection? Now, natural selection theory refers to a mechanism for evolution. Now, it looks at the evolutionary process or evolutionary mechanism, that how population could evolve to be better suited to their environment. And the important aspect of this theory is that traits are heritable. That means that they are passed on from generation to another generation and so on. And similarly, Darwin has also proposed that language also is a process which is considered as evolve, or you can say emerges, and over the time it gets in the process of evolution by the process of descent with modification and changes from their ancestral languages. So they have been, the characteristics of languages have been passed on from generation to generation, from languages to languages, with modification and changes and multiple other families being emerged and produced. And this process of evolution has been compatible or quite analogous to the biological species evolutionary process, which also is the process where we see descent from their ancestral forms. We still need to identify the sequence of events. They are still not clear that what particular event led to which events as a consequence. No one is quite sure exactly how or what happened, but there have been some interesting conjunctions that lead to testable predictions. So empirical studies have been there to look at this phenomena, although we do not have a final word on that. So now we will see and discuss some of the studies that have been done in this area. The underlying assumption of various theoretical views is that language contributes to survival fitness, or that it has adaptive value. Now, with regard to gesture and speech, one thing is very clear, that spoken language developed quite recently in our evolutionary history. When we produce sounds, air is expelled from the lungs and sent through the structures of vocal tracts. When we produce sound, that is the process we follow. So we can change the shape of the vocal tract by altering the position of our lips, jaws, tongues, and larynx. The shape and flexibility of our vocal tract are required for the range of sounds found in contemporary language. The crucial evolutionary development is the enlargement of pharyngeal, the area that lies above the larynx and just below the mouth. In newborn human and adult chimpanzees, the larynx exists directly under the mouth, whereas in adult humans, it exists into the pharynx. This anatomical difference greatly influences the number of sounds that can be produced. For example, newborns and chimpanzees are physically incapable of producing the vowel A, I, O that are found in wide variety of language. The human mouth, throat, and larynx were designed for swallowing and breathing, not for speech. In evolutionary terms, speech may be an example of acceptation, which is basically the process by which features acquire functions for which they were not originally selected. It utilizes pre-existing physical structures for new functions. In the context, the enlargement of pharyngeal area has highly significant consequences, because in an adult human, the passageways are shared among speech eating and breathing, the potential for choking in food is much greater than infants or chimpanzees, which has a smaller pharyngeal area. Why would such an arrangement have evolved? It is one indication that language is so vital that we have evolved a speech apparatus that increases our capacity to choke in order to use productive speech. Then we have Lieberman, who suggests that a functionally modern human vocal tract may have emerged only 125,000 to 150 years ago. These findings imply that speech is relatively recent development. In contrast, evidence indicates that our brain increased substantially in size much earlier, perhaps as far back as 2 to 3 million years ago. Comparative studies suggest that the increase in brain size occurred several million years ago, much earlier than the evolution of the contemporary vocal tract. There are at least two ways we could go as far as this point is concerned. One, it is possible to conclude with Chomsky that language is a very recent evolutionary event which occurred quite rapidly. An alternative view is that language evolved first in the gestural mode and that speech developed much more recently. Corbelis and colleagues has advanced the latter view. In addition to the evidence of brain size, Corbelis also cites evidence that Broca's and Wernicke's areas existed about 2 million years ago. Broca's area controls sign languages in much the way it controls spoken language. Thus, the fossil evidence suggests that the brain regions that control language were in place long before our ability to speak. Regarding gestural aspect, observations suggest that a gestural language may be more easily acquired than a spoken language and thus may be closer to the origin of language. Corbelis then contends that language developed first in gestural form several million years ago and that speech is a much more recent evolutionary event, perhaps only 150,000 years ago. In gestural theory, although it is very attractive, but also raises some issues. One is to explain why speech would ultimately evolve to replace gestures as our primary means of communication. It is not hard to see that speech has features to recommend it. Speech is more arbitrary than sign, enabling users to convey a large number of messages. We can speak in the dark and around corner. So speech basically frees the hands to do other things. So we see that with regard to gestures and speech, we have contrastive studies, and both of the areas basically converge on the fact that speech is a very recent evolutionary event. So the studies of the evolution of language have examined gestures, brain specialization, and vocal tract specializations in non-human primates. Fossils records of vocal tract anatomy suggest that the capacity for speech is a recent evolutionary development.